Kapil, I want to jump right in, and I want to start with a broad question that so many of us deal with all the time. It's this notion of being good enough. From where you sit right now, how come so many people feel that they just don't measure up in whatever domain, personally or professionally?
I think the rules and the standards and the litmus test and the parameters and the criteria that one uses to judge one's self-worth, and that constant comparison of where one is versus where one should be, and the beliefs and the notions and the ideologies and the conditioning that exists within a household or within a workplace or within arena of sports, and all of those messages sort of stand as a big comparison chart, a big standard against which one judges where one is. And naturally, when you have that, everyone is going to sort of feel that they've come up short. I think self-worth is, in many ways, it's sort of a chasing a ghost, because a human being doesn't really know who he is. So as a result, he has an image, and that image is based upon his experiences and what he has been told and what he has accomplished and what he has failed at. And all of those go into that equation of making that self-image. And forever and ever and ever and ever, that individual spends his entire life trying to improve upon that self-image towards a, quote, better self-image, something that is considered to be more in keeping with what society wants and what is deemed to be successful and what is deemed to be more healthy and appropriate and correct. And wherever you have rules, you have problems. So it's inevitable that self-worth is going to be an issue, because wherever there's any type of image, that image can never be enough.
So let me unpack that a little bit. Let's start with this whole idea of comparing oneself or one's business with competitors or with other people. What is your view on that? Do you never do that? Do you never look at yourself, Kapil Gupta, and compare yourself to anybody else?
No, I think that the bar in this world is actually very low. The number of individuals in any domain who are searching for the truth is so minuscule that it is almost practically non-existent. And in a more worldly example, I think in the last podcast, I think you had asked me something along the lines of, wouldn't it be great if, I don't remember the exact thing, but if everyone, was the type that went all out to get something. And my answer was no, it wouldn't be, because that actually allows for the person who is actually willing to go even a little bit all in to jump miles ahead of everybody else, right? So the bar is actually very low. Everyone is basically in the same place. And when someone has even a little bit of authenticity, even a little bit of sincerity, even a little bit of true desire to know the truth about one's domain, completely jettisoning the status quo, then he becomes a superstar. So comparison with others, you're really comparing against people that you shouldn't be comparing against. You're almost begging for a regression. So I don't think anybody should compare against anybody. I think that competition is the road to mediocrity.
But couldn't we all learn something from people who are at that minuscule top that you're talking about?
I think I think that's a very theoretical thing. That couldn't we learn something? Nobody really wants to be forced into learning anything. If someone wants to learn something, or if someone is moved by something, then it was something within them that caused them to either want to learn or to be moved. But I don't think it's of any relevance to say to the public or to any group of people, shouldn't you learn something from that? I think that's totally irrelevant. No, nobody wants to learn if they don't want to learn. And telling them that they should learn is disingenuous because it will fall upon deaf ears.
But what if I do want to learn? And let me give you a specific example. Let's take a younger, I'm just talking about in tenure, a young person who has become a CEO or senior executive of a fast-growing company. Does it serve her or him well to have experienced mentors who have been in his or her shoes and have built and continually grown companies like he or she is building?
That's a good question. I think there are definitely some tricks of the trade, some practical things that are beyond books and journals and schools and real practical level things that one could in fact learn from someone who's been there. There is no doubt. The problem is that if we look at the entire picture, no one will really stay in their own lane. In other words, if you have, quote, a mentor, which I don't really subscribe to mentors. But imagine that you had a mentor, and that mentor had 12 really, really poignant things, and they were very small and quick little things that they could teach you that were of incredible practical value. Now, if you could be absolutely certain that that mentor would give you those 12 little things that you could implement, and that might save you some years and save you some money and save you headache in your business, then that's perfectly, I think, helpful and beneficial. But what will invariably happen is that once those 12 things, or along with those 12 things, will be a culture that will be fed into you by that mentor, you will be subject to his recycled experiences. And so he will not stay within the domain of those 12 little things. He will invariably go into, well, this is my philosophy, and this is my X, Y, and Z, and he will never stay within those 12 things. And so therefore, in my opinion, I think that mentors bring about, I think, in many ways, more detriment than benefit, because they will not be able to be so perfectly disciplined as to give you only what you need without giving you anything extra.
So if I'm that person, and I have a board of directors and I have a board of advisors, each has a role, how do you recommend that I get the best out of that group?
And so if you're semi-forced to be subject to the input of those people, then I think the most practical thing would be, so as not to ruffle feathers and just so that you can actually remain independent, while appearing to be playing the game is to listen to what you want to listen to and take from it what you think will be a benefit to you, knowing full well that the entire time, the vast majority of what you will be hearing will be recycled information that will not be unique, that will be very derivative, that will be very status quo. And if from that, as long as you have your tentacles on and your filter is on full blast, okay, it's wide open, then there might be one or two things that you learn and take away and put into your pocket, and everything else you can ignore. On the whole, I don't subscribe to the idea. You know, my father told me a long time ago, when you buy a used car, you're buying someone else's problems. And I think mentors are used cars. I think mentors have done whatever work. If you have a superstar and who wants to be your mentor, or you have asked them to be your mentor, that superstar did not get there by way of technique or mentorship. Okay, that superstar had found things that, by some alchemy, worked for them. That's why I think it's a waste of time to follow Warren Buffett. It's such a joke. No one should ever be following these people. These people, do you think that they're going to come out and tell you all of their secrets? It is so silly, right? So these people tend to be very introspective individuals. They tend to be individuals who truly want to know what others don't know, and they devote their lives to their craft in order to learn it. They don't operate by way of mentorship tips and tricks, right? So
See, I totally agree with you on that. I totally agree with you on that.
Yeah. So that's why I don't believe in mentors. I think that true originality is only given the proper space and the soil to grow when you are not bound by someone else's experiences and input. When you do not know what you aren't supposed to know, that's when you can create things. I think being naive and innocent is a massive advantage.
So if I'm not learning from the Warren Buffetts of the world, and I do totally subscribe to the key point that you made there is, are they going to really tell you their trade secrets? Maybe a tiny component of it, right? But they're not going to get into the details. I'm with you on that. But if one of those individuals is somebody who has a direct interest in my success, meaning that person is on my board of directors, do you still feel they won't help me in a way, maybe sharing with me things that they ordinarily wouldn't share with others?
Well, you are asking a question through a particular lens. You are asking
but that lens is real because there are people right now who are sitting in positions like that.
That lens is real from one perspective. You are only seeing the, quote, positive side. I hate that word, but positive side, which is you are only seeing the side that might provide you benefit. You are not seeing the side that might provide you detriment. So the only lens through which you're looking at it is, I might get some information that might be useful. And is that true? Yes, it is. And so why would anyone be against gaining useful information? Well, nobody in the right mind would be. So what I am saying is that along with that useful information, oftentimes you'll be handcuffed because you'll be then getting the experiences that person went through, which may not be your experiences, that person may have been living in a different time, or person may have had different interactions with different people. There are so many things. You see, I look at things from the standpoint of what the ultimate possibility is. And that ultimate possibility, I think, is far more related to innocence and freshness and starting from scratch than it is from following in someone else's footsteps.
When was the last time you said to yourself, after observing someone, that person is truly elite?
Miyamoto Musashi.
Okay.
Inspirational.
What caused you? What, I mean, and then what was
A
revealed?
total confluence of DNA. I mean, here we have an individual, who leaves his house at the age of 13, and he goes into the jungle, and he eats berries and drinks water from the river, and day and night he studies the mind, and he studies the craft of swordsmanship, and then he posts signs in the local sort of provinces and say, I challenge the greatest swordsman in this province. And he steps out as this vagabond individual in front of the guy who he challenges, who's fully dressed from head to toe in sort of princely robes, right? And he comes in this wild hair, unkept, hungry and emaciated individual, and never loses a fight. Total and utter devotion to craft with a complete and utter disrespect and dismissal for the status quo. Genius.
What does it take the ordinary person to get to that level of mind strength?
I don't care about ordinary people.
What does it take to the extraordinary person to get to that level of mind strength?
Ordinary people go nowhere. And I think it is completely irrelevant to talk about ordinary people. It is scraping the bottom of the barrel. The masses go nowhere. It is irrelevant talking about them. And this is a society which caters to the lowest common denominator, and that is why it creates greater numbers of lowest common denominators when it frankly should be doing the opposite.
And I totally agree with you. So what would you call somebody who is, let's assume it's an extraordinary person that you know or work with, right? What does it take to get to that level of mind strength? And a lot of people ask, wouldn't you say a complete immersion to...
Well, I don't think that's the question, though. I think the question would be the opposite. I don't think it's about what does it take for this person to get there. I think the real question is the people who have the DNA to already be close to that, who are sensitive to that, who are sympathetic to that, how do those people not become ruined by a mediocre culture and society which will drag them down? That is the question. It isn't the opposite.
And what's it take?
Permission.
That we each give ourselves?
No, that the individual who lives on the fringes of society, who is brilliant in his domain, who has never really fit in, who has always felt like this world was not really his home, who does not quite mingle in society, who has no interest in socialization, who is completely devoted to his craft, and yet at every turn is being told that he needs to be more sort of moderate in his views, that person is searching for permission. That precisely the way in which he is, as wild as he is precisely where he should be. And that individual needs to be given the permission that it is not only okay, but your way of being should actually be celebrated. And do not allow yourself to succumb to the status quo of this filth that we call society.
So is that a life of constant experimentation? Is that all you do every day?
What do you mean?
Just that every day there's an experiment. You're experimenting in a fashion to get closer to that mental depth and that mental framework that you're describing?
I would say that every single day I am in a journey to completely divorce myself from any inputs from my mind.
And when that inner critic never shuts up, what type of conversations are going on in your mind when that continuous, when that's on repeat, that, hey, you're not good enough, or you're not going to get to this level, or you ought to do what this other person's doing? Do you ever have those?
No, those things don't come up anymore. Um, the content of what the mind says is largely irrelevant. My point is just to not have it talk at all.
And what's your advice to dealing with setbacks when somebody starts to live their life like that, right? And they get a crisis comes up, and they have a real hard time in handling it, or she has a real hard time in handling it. What advice do you have for them in that hard hour?
I don't think it's about advice. I think that the reason that failure poses problems is because the viewpoint from which we view the game is fundamentally flawed. So I don't think it's like coming in and on the back end and trying to pick up the pieces. Because if you do that, the pieces are going to fall apart again. So you're only putting the pieces together with Scotch tape. So that's irrelevant. So the real question becomes not, well, what advice do you have to help someone get through it? It doesn't matter if they get through it, because if they get through this, then there's going to be another assault coming very soon. This is not going to be the last assault, right? So the question is that if you know that an assembly line of assaults are coming, then what is it? What is the frame? What is the understanding? What is the lens through which you are viewing the game that is causing you consternation when things do not go the way in which you hope that they should?
And for you, what does that look like?
You are too interested in answers. What do you mean? What does it look like?
You've had some challenges, and I assume recently you've had some things turn out not the way you wanted them. How have you dealt with them? It's not really about answers, as just people want to know.
Well, I don't think it's about how do I deal with them. I think it's about it is yet another example. It is another sort of notch in the wall, so to speak, of just how unsatisfying life really is. Life and the journey of a worldly / domestic existence, if that is the lens through which life is lived, there is a constant struggle in order to achieve a sense of satisfaction. And so that compels one to chase pleasurable experiences, or chase success, or chase, various forms of feathers in the cap in order to give oneself a greater self-image, going back to what you asked earlier, or self-worth, in hopes of arriving at some form of satisfaction, but that never lasts. So I think the more setbacks and quote failures and dramas and conflicts, they just, for the person who is looking at them as such, will just sort of underscore that it drills home the point that Buddha was right. Life indeed is suffering. There is no question about that. And that is not in any way spiritual, mystical, religious, or theoretical.
But does that mean when you say life is suffering, I get where that's coming from. And I also get that there are challenges that we're all going to deal with every day. But if life's that miserable, what the hell do we celebrate?
I don't know why anyone celebrates anything. I celebrate nothing. I truly don't. If something good happens, I don't celebrate it.
What
there
do you
should
do?
be about
What do you do?
There should be there should be about 3 people listening to this podcast, all right? Because everyone else is going to consider these to be dark and negative and nihilistic and defeatist, and I have no interest
insanely
in
radical
reaching
ideas.
those. Absolutely, okay. So even the question that you asked, I mean, I was going to interject, but I allow you to finish the question. You said, well, even though that we know life is suffering, I know that a but is coming. All right, there is only suffering, and there is only misery. There really is no, and the reason that is because nothing lasts. Nothing lasts. If you were a person who was in love with cars, right, and every day I brought you a new sports car, but then every other day I took it away, you would not look at that as a positive experience.
Totally get it. Sure.
Okay. And that is exactly how life is. So I don't sugarcoat things. Okay. I say things the way they are. I have no interest in making anyone happy or sad. So when life is suffering, does that mean that you go and sit in the room and cry all day long? You can. But the only reason that it won't benefit you is because even when you stop crying, it'll still be suffering. So there's no point, right? So I think it is the stark understanding that no matter what you do in this world, Mo, whether you raise children, whether you build a $20 billion company, whether you become a famous professional athlete, at the end of the day, every human being ends up in the same place. They end up alone in their house, with the lights dimmed, wondering when the satisfaction is going to arrive. And it doesn't matter how big their bank account is. Fundamentally, everyone reverts to the foundation of what comes next, because none of these things last. And you do not need to believe a single word that I say. I don't even subscribe to belief. You just have to open your eyes and look.
And I totally get where you're coming from. And at the same time, we're talking to an audience who are building and growing companies. So in the hallway of these companies, how can a message like that be inspirational to people who every day I go in this company or open these doors as a leader to want to inspire a group of people to do great things?
Yes. That's a very, very good question. So what I will say is that there's a great benefit in seeing the truth. But if the truth is seen for the benefit, then it becomes an ulterior motive and it doesn't get anyone anywhere. But there just so happens to be an organic benefit of seeing the truth. And if someone realizes, for instance, that no matter what someone does in their life, they will never arrive at a place of satisfaction that will last, then what will happen is that they will become free. And the reason they'll become free is that they will not tie any sense of hope or anticipation of happiness or self-worth to what they are doing. They will be free to create and to do whatever they wish to do, completely unbound by the hope of success or the fear of failure. Now, this is not why I am saying that one should recognize that life is suffering and that there is no satisfaction and that seeking the truth is the only way. I am not saying that to do those things in order to come at this benefit. I am saying that those things are all true in their own right. It just so happens that seeing those truths organically provides one the benefit of freedom, which ironically is precisely what everyone is seeking to begin with.
So when you're a leader and you've got a group of people who are struggling to make investors happy. You know what? Let's use an actual example. Over the last couple of days, Apple has been bombarded by negative press. Their stock has taken a hit. Every article you're reading is about what went wrong. What did their CEO, Tim Cook, miss, or what are they misleading the world from? If you're sitting in that boardroom right now, seeing that your stock took over a 40% hit over the last 3 or 4 months, how are you dealing with it? What are you saying to the other leaders sitting across from you to say, hey, this is shit that we got to deal with, and here are some things we're going to do to move beyond it?
No, I'm not. I'm not interested in putting out fires. Listen, you can't do all the detrimental things and then on the other side say, well, give me a tip to get out of this mud pit. Things don't work that way. Okay? So the truth is, what
and
gets
I'm not
you
asking you for a tip. Tell me what that conversation's like in that room.
Okay, well, first of all, the conversation is, who am I dealing with? Are these individuals who truly are looking for tips and for a lifeline? And if they are,
assume they're not. Let's assume they're not.
Okay, so if they're not, what I'll say is that the reason that so whether a stock goes up and down, those things are part of business. Okay, so that is the real question. Your problem isn't that the stock is going down. That isn't your problem. Your immediate, most acute problem is the negative emotional impact that is having upon you.
Absolutely.
That's your issue. Because one thing I will promise you, that if that stock plummeted and you were unaffected, you wouldn't be on fire, right? You would do whatever you needed to do to correct whatever issues needed to be correct, and you would take action where action needed to be taken, and that's fine. You wouldn't sit at home. That's fine. But internally, you wouldn't be feeling it. So the question becomes, what is it that is causing you all this emotional turmoil? And what's causing you the emotional turmoil is that the lens through which you view this is a faulty lens. And the lens through which you view this should not be one of attachment, but one of a game. Because you didn't view it as a game that is kept at arm's length at all times, then you became attached to it. So naturally, you are going to suffer highs and lows, and you're going to be like a tin can that is tied with a rope behind the bumper of a car. And wherever that car goes, whatever bump in the road that it feels, you're going to feel. And that's the natural result of it.
And I that was beautifully said. All right? That was beautifully said. And again, I want to assume that the people in that room are your kind of people. They're the ones that want to be superb. And they're the ones maybe who are going to say, screw the outside world. We're doing our own thing. What am I doing to make sure that constant barrage externally isn't impacting the type of business we're building?
No, it's not about the barrage. It's not about the rain. It's the quality of the umbrella.
So I'm totally ignoring it in terms of I'm ignoring the noise, right?
Well, when you say ignoring it, you may be forcefully ignoring it and gritting your teeth, and that wouldn't get you anywhere either. So you can't actively ignore something if you genuinely are impacted by it.
Especially for a public company.
Yeah, everything is irrelevant. Nothing has any significance. Okay? If your company goes up in smoke, it goes up in smoke. Right? I am telling you, the ultimate business person, the ultimate athlete, the ultimate individual in any domain is the one who is first and foremost free. That come success or come failure, it is what it is. And the person will, once again, do whatever needs to be done over here and do whatever needs to be done over here, but internally he is unaffected. And the reason he is unaffected is because he views it as a game. And he knew at the outset that this thing could become this massive, beacon for humanity, or it could go up in smoke.
All right, so if I am viewing it as a game,
Yeah.
what is considered a win and what is considered a loss?
Oh,
Am
those
I
are your own
setting
definitions.
goals and
No, those are your own definitions. I mean, for some people, why they go into it is a very personal thing. For some, it's just the expression of their talent. For someone else, it's the game of making $10 billion. For someone else, it's the game of seeing how big of a company I can create. There's no right or wrong. So those are completely personal definitions as to why one gets into it and what one is truly seeking from it. But the one thing that I will say is that one's litmus test, if it is ultimate satisfaction, regardless of outcome, then that person will not go astray.
what does freedom look like?
I was asked this question so many in the world from the PGA Tour. Right, there's a question. Well, do you know any tour pro who views golf that way? My answer is always the same. Do you know anybody who's tried? No one. How can you expect anyone to look at things from from this otherworldly, mystical, almost anti-societal lenses, when the only thing that the person has ever been taught or been exposed to, or that has been basically shoved down his throat and into his brain, has been the opposite. You can't really ask that question. Why would they? If all that you've taught someone is X, and wherever that person goes, he sees posters of X, and whatever he listens to, he hears X, and whoever he talks to, he is told X, how can you ask the question, which is, well, how many people do you know who think Y? Why would they think Y? They would only think Y if there was other option, right? If they had other options. No one is given another option. Nothing else exists but X. Nothing else exists but prescriptions. Nothing else exists but societal tenets and fabricated rules and all of this silliness. It's all that exists. So what else are you going to create on a daily basis? What are you going to spawn but that?
Do you think that type of mindset can help fuel a company to that level of greatness? I could see the pursuit of one individual like yourself. How would that translate to if Kapil Gupta was building a company that has thousands of people? How do I infect an organization with a message like that and a way of living like that?
By being uncompromising. Human beings will take, if you give a human being an inch, he will take a mile. And if you structure things in an airtight fashion, then you will tend to attract those who are moved by that philosophy. But the moment you compromise, the moment you crack open the door, you're finished.
And compromise on what?
Compromise on your vision. Compromise on what you believe to be purity.
And if it
come
were,
what may.
If it were you, how would you articulate your vision to the thousands of people who work for you?
Well,
Is
whatever
it
my
the
vision
ultimate
would be,
freedom?
whatever. Well, I mean, that would be related to. I mean, what do you mean in the making of a company?
Yeah, let's say you're building a company.
Okay, so if I was making the company, then I would figure out why it is that I'm making the company in the first place. What does satisfaction look like to me, right? What are my non-negotiables? So those are those would be my viewpoints. Those would be the lenses, through which I would view things. And then once I had my those that were the things that were non-negotiable to me, then whoever would be hired, I would be surrounded by, would be individuals who were airtight in those non-negotiables. I wouldn't be interested in convincing anybody. So you become, when you have an airtight vision, You cannot allow your mind to be exposed to views that are contrary and inferior to your vision, because those things will sabotage you. That's why on Twitter, I mute and block people all the time, because it isn't a form of retaliation. It is that I can't have that in my space. Everything the eyes see and everything that my mind is exposed to must be chosen. It must be precise. It must be in keeping with the vision, because the one thing that I am completely and utterly cognizant and acutely aware of is the danger of culture, the danger of environment. Do you know the number of individuals who in this world who were born to be great, but they were almost killed in the womb by this society, and they will never even know that they were supposed to be great? This is the power of environment and culture. The greatest individual will shun the world. He will live as an isolationist. He will be a hermit, because he cannot afford association.
I'm totally in agreement with you. I'm totally in agreement with you there. And I can see how we're all infected by the energy of others. But you know that I'm going to ask this question. What are your non-negotiables?
In what?
In life. In your life right now, what are your non-negotiables?
Arriving at complete and total freedom from the mind.
And does that dictate every interaction you have with anybody?
From a behavioral, from a societal perspective, no ingested substances of any kind, ever in my life. I've never had a drop of alcohol in my life. I've never taken a drug in my life. I've never smoked in my life. Obviously I've taken Tylenol and, cough medicine and those kind of things, and some antibiotics. But those, I live a very hermetic existence. I go out, but quietly.
All right, two more things for you. I really love this idea of approaching a business with this notion of non-negotiables. We've heard it before, but I don't think within this context. There's a lot of companies that are built on solving big problems, right? First person that comes to mind that's solving big problems is Elon Musk. If you're standing in those shoes and I want to take people to the moon, I want to build an electric car that's going to change the entire face of an industry. How do you think about these problems?
I wonder, perhaps, Elon Musk has, very rare DNA. So a person who has rare DNA in one domain, probably is already doing some of these things, right? He may already be viewing things from these lenses. I wouldn't be surprised. But I think Elon Musk is a perfect example of an individual who I would say needs to be very cognizant of the fact that, because he is an outlier with regard to levels of success and being very original and imaginative and not placing himself and confining himself to societal limits, that he needs to be very cognizant of the fact that this society is a poisonous swarm that through various different avenues could serve to derail his gargantuan efforts. So I think it's largely, those types of individuals, I think it's largely about protecting oneself. and to keeping oneself pure to one's visions, because if the window is cracked open, that poisonous gas is coming through the window, right? So I would say that the maintenance of the purity of one's vision without the slightest form of compromise is what must be kept intact.
And how do you maintain a level of when you're dealing with such monumental problems? What are you doing to make sure that you don't let doubt overshadow the level of confidence you need to keep pursuing these audacious goals?
Well, doubt oftentimes comes from society. So I think that's perfectly in line with what.
But we internalize it. Most of us, at least most of us humans, internalize it.
Well, that's because most humans value society. So if you value someone or something, then you're going to lend an ear to it. If you think that something is baseless, or that a person, that whenever that person speaks, the person speaks, nonsense, and then you would not listen to that person. So it's because people place value upon society that they allow it in. That's why it's irrelevant to tell someone, well, don't listen to people. Don't let them, don't let the world, bring you down. That can't happen unless that person has no respect for the world.
And it's hard as hell to think like that, right? Like, I totally concur with your thinking that there is tremendous comfort in being mediocre, right? Or whatever, however you want to define it, being average, or being part of the study. There's tremendous comfort in that. It takes real responsibility for somebody to accept that being great is a responsibility. And there are very few people who want to go there.
I don't think being great's a responsibility.
You don't?
Why is it a responsibility? No. Why is being greater? Who are you being responsible to?
Yourself.
You don't owe yourself anything. If you're great, it's because you have no choice. It's not I have a responsibility to do this and that. I have a responsibility to myself. No, you do it because you have no choice. That's just where all of your inclinations and your energy goes. It didn't ever ask your opinion.
Why wouldn't I want to be great?
Well, why wouldn't someone want $1 billion, delivered in 10 silver suitcases, lined up in a horizontal fashion on their doorstep tomorrow?
Line it up.
Why wouldn't they? Well, of course they would. Okay, well, things don't, but want is irrelevant, right?
Yeah, want is irrelevant. It's the pursuit, or whatever, however you want to define it.
Well, yeah. So what I'll say is, I don't know why I turned out the way I turned out. Okay, I don't know why. The one thing I'll tell you to answer your question, yes, it is difficult for someone to think like this, but the reason it's difficult is because they would be doing it in order to make themselves think like this, right? I mean, I never tried to make myself think like this. No one ever told me. I never followed anybody. I wasn't mentored into it, right? I've always hated society, right? So I think.
But was there a point for you when you knew, however you want to frame it, right? That you were just cut out of a different cloth and you were just going to follow a different path. Was there something that triggered that for you?
No, like if I go back and examine, oftentimes it isn't what you do, it's what you find yourself doing. And so if I was to go back and examine, I've always been a loner. I'm an only child, right? I've always done things alone. I've always got out to eat alone, and whenever I would go out to eat, I never had any interest in going with other people. I've always been, a writer. I've never been interested in the social scene. I've always asked questions that were thought of as, crazy and wild and, have just totally different, right? So, there was no event. It's just sort of always been that way. And you learn that as you become an adult and you look backwards and you find that the seeds of being this way were sown at a very young age, and they weren't sown by anybody. They were just DNA. So that's why I think a lot of these things about self-improvement and self-development are really disingenuous, because you can't really make yourself what you're not, right? So how, this, I think you have to work from a place where you genuinely are. And if something really, really resonates with you, then you naturally will begin to move in that direction without actually making a choice, because the thing resonated with you so much.
Well,
So,
I can speak for people who are listening and tell you that there is a whole lot of us who want to achieve that level of freedom from our minds. And that's, whether you call it a prescription or not, for the majority of the people who I've interacted with, who listen to these podcasts or our conversations, that is the singular issue. We want freedom from our minds. And every time we listen to you, we get something that help us realize, maybe this is what I need to take away, or maybe this is how I should start to think in order to do that. That's a worthy pursuit.
well, I will have to disagree with you. I don't think that people want freedom from their minds. I think it's a tasty notion when they're being tormented. And when they're not being tormented, they want freedom to watch television. They want freedom to follow politics. They want freedom to complain about the president. They want freedom to go to the local nightclub. Okay? So human beings are fair weather fans. They are bandwagon jumpers. They are situational creatures. The number of people who truly want freedom from their mind, I can probably count on one hand, who exist, in maybe, in the
In
Western
society,
Hemisphere.
right?
Yeah. Okay. Right. So people want the benefit of things. They don't want the totality of things. So if I told someone, well, in order to get freedom from your mind, you're going to have to give away the good as well as the bad. No, thank you. I don't want that. I only want to give away the bad. I only want to give away the negative feelings and the sadness and the sorrow, and I want to keep the happiness and the joy. Well, sadness and sorrow and joy are two sides of the same coin, right? So no one wants freedom from the mind.
Well, I do. Let me go on record on saying that I do. Maybe I haven't quite grasped the level that you're talking about, but that is the singular thing that, to me, distinguishes you from everybody else that's out there. That is your genuine objective. And if we can all just capture 10% of that, I'm convinced that we'd all be better off.
Okay.
So before we sign off, I know you don't watch TV, you don't pay attention to sports, but something interesting happened yesterday that I just want to get your perspective on. There was a kicker who missed a relatively short game-winning field goal yesterday for the Bears to knock them out of the playoffs. He's a young kid who's had horrible luck. And obviously the world of Twitter and the world of broadcasters are all over the kid. What do you say to somebody like that?
I have no interest in making. I have no interest in making. I have no interest in making him feel better. I would say to him, listen, do you really want to arrive at the truth and arrive at the place where you are unaffected by success or failure, which, by the way, will help you arrive at your ultimate performances, probably more often than anybody else in the NFL.
And
if the answer is yes, then I will say, okay, well then I don't care how you feel right now. Let's scratch everything and look at the lens through which you are viewing the game. And you are viewing the game from the lens of self-gratification versus failure, right? And viewed through that lens, you will have failure far, far, far more often than you will have self-gratification. So if that's the game, you've already lost. You might as well go home. You're not going to win that game. Nobody wins that game. So if you want the truth, then the truth is that arriving at the place where you are unaffected by success or failure, and that you are not interested in self-gratification because you know that along with that self-gratification will bring you 10 times more of sorrow and failure, then we can help you approach the game by allowing you to understand what the truth really is so that you can view the game as a game. And that will allow you to be free because it is only the one who has everything that can actually play. It is only the one who is full before he arrives that asks nothing from the game. And when a human being has no need, he is free. And when he is free, he becomes untouchable. He becomes a legend.
And on that note, the topic of our next conversation is the game. Why don't we leave it at that? Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mo.